The morning sun rose like a soft drumbeat across the golden plains, washing the village of Ghani in light and laughter. Smoke curled lazily from clay chimneys, the smell of roasted yam and millet thick in the air. Children ran barefoot through the red earth, chasing each other with shrieks of joy. Women in bright wrappers balanced pots of water on their heads, their laughter echoing between the huts. The sound of goats bleating and pestles pounding rhythmically against mortars filled the morning like music. It was a day of peace, and for Ebony, it was a life she had always thanked the gods for. Her hut stood at the edge of the village, near the stream that whispered softly through tall grasses. She rose early every morning, humming as she swept the compound, her hands graceful even in small tasks. Her smile, open and sincere, made even strangers feel at home. When she passed through the market, traders called out blessings, and the old women always said, "The gods made her with gentle hands." Her husband, Kelechi, was a man of quiet strength. His skin glistened in the sun as he tilled the land, his laughter deep and rare but true when it came. He wasn't rich, but what they had was built from patience and unity. The two were inseparable, planting, harvesting, cooking together. At dusk, they would sit outside their hut, eating roasted maize as the sun sank behind the palm trees. Villagers often watched them and whispered, "They are like one body breathing two hearts." But peace, as every elder says, is like the still surface of a river, beautiful until disturbed. Among the women pounding yam that morning, one face did not carry joy. Ifeoma stood apart, her eyes sharp beneath her headscarf. She was Kelechi's cousin, but her spirit was restless. Where others saw Ebony's kindness, she saw weakness. Where they saw harmony, she saw threat. Her own harvest had failed twice, and her suitors had turned elsewhere. Bitterness grew in her heart like creeping weeds. Nearby, Mama Ijeoma, Kelechi's mother, sat on her wooden stool, her wrapper tied tightly around her chest. Her hands moved steadily over a basket of beans, but her eyes, dark, watchful, followed Ebony. She had never truly welcomed her daughter-in-law. Ebony was too soft-spoken, too gentle for her liking. She wanted a woman who commanded, not one who smiled through everything. As the sun climbed higher, Ebony came to greet her mother-in-law with her usual respect. "Mama, good morning," she said, kneeling slightly, her tone filled with warmth. "The gods bless your hands today." Mama Ijeoma's lips curved into something between a smile and a sneer. "Good morning," she replied flatly, not looking up from her beans. "You are always singing in the morning. Is life always that sweet for you?" Ebony blinked, unsure how to respond. "It is good to give thanks while the sun still rises," she said softly. "Humph," the older woman muttered. "Maybe you should thank the gods for the husband you took from me too quickly. Ever since you came, he barely visits my hut." The words landed like stones. Ebony bowed her head, forcing a smile. "Mama, your son loves you deeply." But Mama Ijeoma cut her off. "Go and cook your food," she said sharply. "Your words are too many for one morning." Ebony stood quietly, nodding. "Yes, Mama," she said, turning away. As she walked back to her hut, Ifeoma approached, her voice low but dripping with mock sweetness. "Do not worry," she said, pretending to comfort her. "Some mothers cannot bear to see their sons choose another woman's love." Ebony looked up at her cousin-in-law, her brows furrowed slightly. There was something unsettling in Ifeoma's smile, too polished, too hollow. But Ebony only murmured, "The gods will keep peace among us," and walked on. Behind her, Ifeoma's smile faded into a thin line. "Peace," she whispered to herself, "is for fools who have never lost." By evening, when the drums sounded and the air cooled, Ebony sat with Kelechi outside their hut, her head resting lightly on his shoulder. Fireflies flickered between the tall grasses, and the smell of roasted yam filled the air. Kelechi looked down at her, brushing a stray curl from her face. "You bring calm to my spirit, Ebony," he said. "Even when the world is loud." She smiled softly. "Then may my calm never leave you." But across the compound, Mama Ijeoma watched from her doorway, her face hidden in shadow. Her eyes gleamed in the firelight, a storm gathering quietly behind the mask of night. She whispered under her breath, almost like a curse carried by the wind, "Let us see how long her sweetness lasts." And as the moon climbed over Ghani that night, the drums faded, the laughter hushed, and the air thickened with something unseen, the first stirrings of envy waiting to break a peaceful heart. The next morning began like any other, with the soft call of roosters and the smell of wood smoke curling through the dawn air. But in the heart of the compound, a silence hung that no song could lift. Ebony rose early as she always did, her bare feet whispering over the earth as she swept the yard. She hummed a gentle tune, one her mother used to sing, but this morning the melody felt lonely. From across the compound, Ifeoma's voice broke the quiet, sharp and mocking. "Ah, see our perfect wife always working like she owns the sun," she called out, her laughter slicing through the air. A few of the younger women near the well giggled nervously, their eyes darting toward Ebony, unsure whether to join in or stay silent. Ebony simply smiled faintly and continued sweeping, refusing to let her heart grow heavy. But envy is like smoke, it slips into corners unseen yet choking. That afternoon, as the women gathered by the stream to wash clothes, Ifeoma sat among them, speaking in low, poisonous tones. "You all think Ebony is so gentle," she said, scrubbing her cloth with exaggerated force. "But do you know how quickly she made Kelechi forget his mother? She cooks with herbs that dull his mind. I have seen it myself." The women gasped. "Are you sure?" one whispered. "I swear by the gods," Ifeoma said, lowering her voice dramatically. "Why do you think he refuses to speak against her? She has tied his heart with charms." By evening the whispers had grown wings. What began as gossip by the stream spread through the market, the fields, the homes. Ebony used medicine on her husband. She controls him. She is not what she seems. Even Mama Ijeoma, sitting on her stool near the cooking fire, heard the rumors, and though her heart should have known better, bitterness clouded her judgment. When Ebony brought her dinner that night, steaming soup with tender fish, Mama Ijeoma didn't touch it. She looked up at Ebony with narrowed eyes. "Did you cook this with your heart?" she asked slowly, "or with your potions?" Ebony froze, her hands trembling. "Mama?" "Do not pretend," Mama Ijeoma snapped. "People are talking. They say you have bound my son like a goat with your witchcraft." Ebony's eyes filled with tears. "Mama, I swear by the gods of the earth and sky I have done no such thing. I love Kelechi with a pure heart." But Mama Ijeoma turned away. "Words," she said coldly. "Sweet words fall easily from dangerous tongues." Kelechi entered just then, sweat on his brow from the farm. "What is this, Mama?" he asked gently. His mother crossed her arms. "You ask me? Ask your wife instead. They say she has wrapped you around her finger like thread." He looked between them, confusion darkening his features. "Who says this?" "Ifeoma and others. The whole village murmurs. Do you not hear?" Kelechi exhaled heavily, running a hand through his hair. "People will always talk, Mama. Do you deny it?" He hesitated, not because he believed the rumors, but because he was weary of choosing between two women he loved. His silence, though meant to calm the storm, only fed it. Ebony's eyes searched his face, desperate. "Kelechi, say something. Tell her you know me." But Kelechi's gaze dropped to the floor. "Ebony, the more we speak, the more the village will burn. Let us rest." Those words, simple, heavy, cowardly, cut deeper than any accusation. Ebony felt her chest tighten, her throat ache. The man who once swore to protect her now stood in silence as her name turned to ash in his mother's mouth. Outside, the drums that usually sang at sunset were quiet. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Days passed and the whispers grew crueler. Ifeoma fueled them like a firekeeper feeding embers. She told the market women that Ebony's smile hid evil. She told the men that she cursed their crops when they didn't greet her. She even told Mama Ijeoma that the gods had shown her a vision. Ebony standing over her husband's body, laughing. The older woman's heart hardened completely. Where once she merely disapproved, now she despised. One evening, as Ebony served food in the compound, Mama Ijeoma deliberately knocked the bowl from her hands, spilling hot soup across the ground. "Do not feed me poison," she shouted. "You have taken my son's heart, but you will not take his life." The neighbors turned to watch. Ebony dropped to her knees, shaking, trying to gather the fallen food, tears streaking her face. "Mama, please." But Ifeoma's voice rang out coldly, "We all see now. Her gentleness was only a mask. Even her tears are tricks." Kelechi appeared in the doorway again, his face pale with shame, but before he could speak, Mama Ijeoma stood and declared, "No more. I will not eat or sleep under the same roof as this snake." Ebony's hands froze mid-motion. "Mama, please." "Enough," the old woman roared, pointing toward the gate. "You may have fooled my son but not me. You do not belong in this house." For a long moment, Kelechi said nothing. The fire crackled between them, the only sound in the night. Ebony looked at him, eyes wide, pleading, but his silence spoke louder than any words. In that silence, Ifeoma smiled faintly from the shadows. The first seed had taken root. The next market day dawned bright and clear, But for Abony the sun brought no warmth. The whispers that had once lingered at the edges of the village now followed her everywhere like shadows. As she walked through the narrow paths between the stalls, carrying her woven basket of cassava, women who once greeted her with laughter now turned away. A few murmured under their breath, pretending not to see her. Only the wind seemed to answer her, "Good morning." Abony kept her head high, her bare feet kicking up the red dust, her heart praying silently for strength. But she could feel it, the weight of suspicion pressing against her back, the sting of eyes that once admired her now burning with distrust. She tried to hold on to her peace, tried to tell herself that truth would always rise like dawn. But envy, when dressed as righteousness, can fool even the God's chosen. That evening, Kelechi came home from the market later than usual, his expression unreadable. He dropped his hoe against the wall and sat heavily on a stool. Abony knelt beside him, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You look troubled," she said softly. "Has the harvest not gone well?" He didn't answer. Instead, he looked up at her, eyes clouded with something she hadn't seen before, doubt. "Abony," he said slowly, "Mama told me something today. She said you took the money I kept aside for the seed traders." Abony blinked in confusion. "What money?" "The 3 cowries I hid under the mat by the hearth." She frowned deeply. "Kelechi, I never touched your money. You know I would not." But before she could finish, the curtain at the doorway lifted, and Mama Igioma's voice thundered through the hut. "Lies?" she spat. "You think the gods do not see? I watched her sweeping near the hearth yesterday. Her hands are greedy even when her mouth is sweet." Abony's heart pounded. "Mama, by everything sacred, I did not take it." Ifioma entered behind her, pretending to look concerned but her eyes glinting like a cat's in firelight. "Ah, sister," she said softly, "sometimes hunger drives even the gentle to dark things. Maybe she only meant to borrow it." Abony turned to her, trembling. "Ifioma, you know I—" But Ifioma gasped, cutting her off. "Wait. Is this not the wrapper she bought from the market last week? The one she claimed was a gift?" Her words struck like a whip. Mama Igioma's eyes widened, her nostrils flaring. "So you used the money for clothes while we starved?" Kelechi looked at Abony, his jaw tightening. "Abony, tell the truth." Tears welled in her eyes. "The wrapper was given by Ngozi, my friend. Ask her, she brought it from her cousin's stall." But the room had already turned against her. Mama Igioma shouted, "Ngozi will say anything for you. You have fooled us all long enough." The noise spilled out into the compound, drawing neighbors from their huts. Soon a small crowd gathered, their murmurs weaving into the night like insects' buzz. "Is it true?" one man whispered. "They say she stole the family money. I always said her face was too calm to be honest." Abony's heart broke as she looked at them, the same faces that once called her daughter, now twisted with suspicion. Mama Igioma stepped forward, holding the empty clay pot that once contained the money, shaking it for all to see. "Here. Let the gods bear witness. My son's house has been defiled by a thief." The villagers gasped. Abony fell to her knees, crying, "No. The gods know my hands are clean." But no one listened. Kelechi stood motionless, torn between love and fear. His mother's voice roared over everything, "What shame you have brought upon us! A wife who steals from her own home. The ancestors turn away from such a woman." Ifioma stepped closer, her tone smooth and poisonous. "Mama, perhaps the gods will forgive her if she confesses. But if she continues to deny—" She paused dramatically, letting the words hang like smoke. "Then her punishment must be severe." The villagers nodded uneasily. Some agreed, others looked away, uncomfortable but unwilling to speak. Abony lifted her tear-streaked face to Kelechi, her voice breaking. "My husband, do you believe them?" Kelechi's eyes filled with pain. He looked at her, the woman who once laughed beside him at the river, who shared his food and his dreams. He wanted to say no. He wanted to defend her. But Mama Igioma's glare cut into him like a blade, and the weight of the village's judgment crushed his tongue. I do not know what to believe anymore," he said quietly. The silence that followed was louder than a drum. Abony stared at him, her lips trembling. Then she let out a small, broken laugh, not of amusement but disbelief. "You do not know?" she whispered. "Then perhaps you never did." The night wind howled through the compound. Mama Igioma raised her hand to the sky, declaring, "Let the ancestors hear. This woman is a thief. She has shamed us. She will not remain under my roof another day." The crowd echoed her cry. Someone shouted, "Send her away." Ebony's tears fell freely now, soaking the earth at her knees. "You are wrong," she said through sobs. "I have stolen nothing. But you have taken everything that made my heart full." Her words drifted into the night, unheard, as the crowd began to disperse, leaving her kneeling in the dust. The last thing she saw before she lifted her head was Kelechi, standing still, his eyes on the ground as though afraid to meet hers. The stars above flickered faintly, indifferent. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked, and the drums of the village began to play again, not in celebration but in mourning for a love already dying. Ebony was gone by sunrise. The rooster had barely crowed when Mama Ijeoma stormed into her hut, threw her bundle of clothes to the ground, and shouted for everyone to see. "Out," she screamed. "You will not eat from the same pot as those you have shamed." Kelechi stood by the doorway, his arms folded tight across his chest. He said nothing, not even when Ebony turned to him, her eyes swollen from a night without sleep. "Kelechi," she whispered, "will you not speak for me?" But he looked away. Ebony clutched her small bag of belongings, a torn wrapper, a comb, and the wooden spoon her mother had given her on her wedding day, and stepped out into the morning light. The sky was cruelly beautiful. The air smelled of wet earth after dawn dew, birds chirped on distant trees, and life in the village continued as if nothing had happened. Women were already fetching water, men preparing their tools for the farm. Yet every face that turned toward her was filled with scorn. "She's the thief. Mama Ijeoma's son's wife. They say she lied to his face." The words floated like smoke through the air, burning Ebony's heart. She held her head high, but her eyes glistened with unshed tears. Mama Ijeoma followed her to the edge of the compound, shouting, "May the gods deal with you as you have dealt with us. You came to this house with pride, now leave it with shame." Ebony stopped for a moment, turned back and said softly, "You may cast me out, Mama, but the truth does not die with silence." The old woman hissed, "Keep your cursed tongue quiet." Kelechi stood behind her, silent still. For a fleeting second their eyes met, his full of guilt, hers full of heartbreak. But he didn't move. And so, barefoot and broken, Ebony walked down the long path leading away from the village. The road stretched endlessly through the fields and the sun grew harsh. She walked for hours, her feet blistered, her mind replaying every word from the night before. She thought of the home she had tended, the meals she had cooked, the love she had believed was unshakable. But love without trust is a clay pot, one fall and it shatters beyond repair. By midday she reached the river, the same one where she and Kelechi had once fetched water together, laughing as they splashed each other. Now it mirrored her sorrow. She sat on the bank, dropped her bundle and buried her face in her hands. "Why, gods?" she whispered. "Why have you let them believe lies over love?" The wind blew gently, brushing her cheek like a mother's hand. And in that quiet she heard her own spirit answer, "Because your story is not over yet." Days passed. Ebony found shelter in the next village, helping an old widow who took pity on her. She swept floors, fetched water and sang softly as she worked. Slowly the pain began to settle into something stronger, not bitterness but resolve. While she toiled, news reached her. The rains had failed in her former village. The seeds never sprouted. The granary stood empty. Mama Ijeoma had fallen sick, and Kelechi was desperate, wandering from shrine to shrine, seeking forgiveness from the gods. Some whispered that the ancestors were angry, that they had punished the house that cast out an innocent woman. Ebony said nothing. She only prayed silently for mercy, not vengeance. And one evening, as she watched the orange sun sink over the fields, she smiled faintly for the first time in many moons. "They took everything from me," she murmured, "but they cannot take who I am." Her eyes shone with quiet strength. The same hands that had been cast out now created beauty. She began weaving mats that caught the attention of traders from faraway towns. Her name slowly spread, not as the thief they once called her, but as Ebony the Weaver of Grace. Unbeknownst to her, her work would soon bring her face to face with Kelechi again, in a way no one expected. Weeks turned into months, and Ebony's new life slowly blossomed like the first flower after a dry season. The old widow she stayed with, Mama Chica, treated her like a daughter. Together they worked from dawn to dusk, spinning raffia, dyeing cloth, and weaving mats that shimmered in the afternoon light. The quiet rhythm of work gave Ebony's heart something it hadn't known in a long time: peace. But peace is not the same as forgetting. At night, when the crickets sang, her mind would wander back to the village she left behind. She could still see Mama Ijeoma's sharp eyes, still hear Kelechi's silence, still feel the weight of shame as she walked away. Sometimes tears slipped down her cheeks as she whispered, If only he had believed me. One afternoon while she was at the market selling her woven mats, a merchant from her old village stopped by her stall. His name was Ghanian, a talkative man who loved gossip more than his own trade. He fingered the edges of her work, eyes widening. "This is fine work," he said. "You must be the one they call Abani the Weaver of Grace. Even the chiefs in my village speak of your skill." Abani's hands froze for a second. "Your village?" she asked quietly. "Which one?" He named it, her old home. The air left her lungs. Ghanian, not noticing her trembling, went on. "Strange though," he said, lowering his voice. "They say the gods are still punishing that house. Mama Ijeoma has grown thin as a broomstick. Her son looks like a man who carries a spirit on his back. They say their harvest failed because they wronged someone innocent." Abani felt a pang, not of triumph but of sorrow. "And what of the others?" she asked. He shrugged. "Some left the village. Some whisper of going to seek forgiveness from the one they wronged. But no one knows where she is." Abani looked down at her mats. Her fingers trembled as she tied the raffia threads. "If the gods will it," she said softly, "they will find peace." That night she couldn't sleep. Mama Chica noticed her staring into the fire. "Child," the old woman said, "your heart is not where your body rests." Abani's lips curved into a faint smile. "I left a wound behind, Mama. And though they hurt me, I cannot find rest knowing pain still lives there." Mama Chica nodded slowly. "Then go, not to seek revenge but to show what grace looks like when it returns home." Abani rose early the next morning. She packed her few belongings, a wrapper, her wooden spoon, and one of her finest woven mats. The sun had barely touched the horizon when she began walking back toward her old village. The journey was long. The road was dry and cracked. Yet each step carried her closer not to the people who broke her, but to the person she had become. Along the way, travelers greeted her with respect. "Abani the Weaver," they called. "Your hands bless the earth." By the time she reached the edge of her former village, the evening light had softened into gold. She stopped and looked down at her reflection in the small stream that marked the boundary. Gone was the broken girl who once wept there. Standing now was a woman, strong, calm, clothed in dignity. She took a deep breath and whispered, "Let me walk in peace, not pride." And as she stepped onto the familiar red soil, children noticed her first. They ran ahead shouting, "Abani has returned. The weaver has come back." From within her old compound, Kelechi looked up at the sound, disbelief washing over his face. Kelechi stood frozen in the courtyard as the children's voices echoed through the compound. For a moment, he thought his ears deceived him, that the heat or his guilt had finally made him imagine things. But when Abani stepped through the gate, graceful and composed, his heart stopped. She looked different. Her skin glowed with health, her eyes were calm like river water, and her clothes were clean but simple. Gone was the trembling, broken woman who had once begged him to believe her. In her place stood someone unshaken, quiet, strong, radiant with dignity. The yard went silent. Even the goats seemed to pause. Mama Ijeoma was sitting on a wooden stool by the shade, her body frail now, her wrapper loosely tied around her shoulders. When she saw Abani, her hand jerked as if struck by lightning. "You," she whispered, voice trembling. "Ghost of my sins." Abani bowed slightly. "Mama," she said gently, "it is I." Kelechi finally found his voice. "Abani, where have you been?" His words stumbled out like a child's first steps. "I went where peace would have me," she replied softly. "And peace received me with kindness." Mama Ijeoma's face twisted, pride fighting with guilt. She wanted to shout, to drive Abani away again, but her strength failed her. The fever that had plagued her for weeks made her hands shake. She tried to rise but stumbled. Without hesitation, Abani rushed forward and caught her. The old woman's eyes widened in shock as Abani steadied her gently. "Careful, Mama," she murmured. "Sit." Mama Ijeoma's throat constricted. She looked into Abani's face. No hatred, no bitterness, only concern. The shame hit her harder than any curse could. Tears welled in her eyes. Why would you help me?" she croaked. "After all I did to you?" "Because the gods see all, Mama," Abani said quietly. "And they know I am not your enemy." Your heart was heavy with fear, not evil. The old woman began to sob, not the proud, fierce matriarch of before, but a mother broken by her own cruelty. "I wronged you," she cried. "I wronged my son, my ancestors. Forgive me, Abani. Forgive this wicked heart." Kelechi fell to his knees beside them, his voice trembling. "Abani, I should have defended you. I was a coward. Every day since you left, I have known no peace. Ebony looked from mother to son. Her face was still, almost serene. The gods allowed it all for a reason, she said. So that what was built on pride could crumble, and what is rebuilt may stand on truth. Silence hung thick. Only the wind rustled through the banana leaves. Then, slowly, Ebony unrolled the mat she had carried, the finest she had ever woven. The threads shimmered like dawn light. I brought this for your home, she said. May whoever sits upon it remember that peace is softer than pride. Mama Igioma reached out a trembling hand, touching the mat with reverence, then pressed it to her chest. You came back not with curses but with blessings, she whispered through tears. You are more a daughter to me than I ever deserved. Kelechi bowed his head, tears streaming down his face. Ebony, will you come home? She smiled sadly. This house was never mine to claim again, she said. But forgiveness, that is the home I have built inside me. For a long moment none of them spoke. The sun had begun to set, casting a warm orange glow over the compound. The light wrapped around Ebony like a crown, soft, radiant, divine. The villagers, drawn by curiosity, gathered around. When they saw what was happening, the weaver forgiving those who cast her out, they murmured in awe. Truly, one old man said, the gods favor the humble. Mama Igioma took Ebony's hands in hers and kissed them. May my ancestors bless you for the mercy you have shown. And Ebony, her heart light for the first time in many moons, simply said, let peace live here again. As the evening drums began to sound in the distance, a faint smile curved her lips. The same compound where she had once been thrown out in shame now echoed with gratitude and healing. The story of Ebony the Weaver of Grace would soon travel far beyond that village, not as a tale of suffering, but as a song of forgiveness that would outlive them all. That night, the air in the village carried a strange calm, the kind that follows a storm that has finally broken. The moonlight spilled across the courtyard where Ebony had once been humiliated, now peaceful, almost sacred. The villagers had returned to their homes, whispering her name in awe, repeating the story of the woman who came back not with vengeance, but with grace. Inside Mama Igioma's hut, a small fire crackled. The old woman lay on her mat, weak but comforted. Ebony sat beside her, fanning her gently while Kelechi stirred a pot of herbs over the fire. For the first time, they sat together not as accuser and accused, but as people bound by truth and repentance. Mama Igioma spoke softly, her voice frail but sincere. The sickness that held me, it began the day you left, she said. I thought it was witchcraft, but it was guilt eating my bones. Ebony placed a wet cloth on her forehead. Guilt is a heavy spirit, Mama. But even it bows to forgiveness. Kelechi turned to look at her, eyes glistening in the firelight. You have changed, Ebony. The woman who left this village, she was broken. The one who sits here now, she is light itself. Ebony smiled faintly, her gaze distant. Pain can either make us bitter or make us bloom. I chose to bloom. The old woman coughed softly, reaching for Ebony's hand. When I look at you, I see the daughter I never had. The gods sent you back not to shame me but to save me. Promise me, Ebony, promise you will not let my shame be the end of this house. I promise, Ebony whispered. This house will stand again, built on truth and peace. Outside, the night was still, except for the soft chirping of crickets and the occasional hoot of an owl. The stars above seemed brighter than usual, like 1,000 ancestors watching in approval. Hours later, when Mama Igioma finally drifted to sleep, Kelechi stepped outside and motioned for Ebony to follow. The moonlight bathed the compound in silver. He turned to her, his face shadowed by remorse. I have no words to undo what I did, he said. Every day I saw your empty mat and felt the silence like a wound. I prayed for a chance to make it right, but I never thought the gods would be merciful enough to bring you back. Ebony's voice was calm. You believed lies because fear spoke louder than love. But now that fear is gone, let your actions from this night forward speak louder than your guilt. He took a hesitant step closer. Ebony, do you still have space in your heart for me? She looked at him for a long time. The silence between them was deep, not heavy but full of all the things neither could say. Kelechi, she said at last, what we were has passed. But what we could be, that will depend on how you walk now. He nodded slowly, tears forming. Then I will walk with honor, even if from afar. You deserve more than my love, you deserve my respect. For a long time they stood there under the moon, no longer husband and wife, but two souls finally free of the weight they had carried. In the morning the village awoke to a new rhythm. Women carried water singing Ebony's name. Children followed her, touching her hand for blessing. Traders came to see her mats, and elders requested her presence at the council to speak about peace and reconciliation. Mama Igioma, frail but smiling, told everyone who visited, "This child you see, she is proof that the gods test the heart before they crown it." And Abani, ever humble, would only reply, "The gods crown those who choose kindness when pain would be easier." That evening, as the sun dipped low and the sky turned amber, Abani stood by the river again, the same place she had once sat weeping. The water rippled in soft gold, reflecting her calm face. She closed her eyes and whispered, "I left with nothing, and returned with everything that matters." The wind carried her words gently, like a lullaby to the ancestors. And somewhere beyond the hills, a drum began to play, slow, steady, peaceful, the sound of a heart finally at rest.